there's springtime. Nice weather is upon us. So let's get started. We have a whole list of great sponsors and underwriters and industry leaders that I won't, I'm not going to list them all off right now, but there are great supporters of our organization and our efforts. So let's get into it. Springtime. So dandelions are going to be coming up. The bees are going to be flitting around, and we're all eager to jump and run and get out in the nice weather. But before we do that, we have a little bit of work to do. But if we take a systematic approach, it won't take too long, and we can incorporate it into some of the activities we all love to do in springtime anyway. Like climbing in attics, always a good time. So it can be a little confusing about where to start and how to go about it, but if we just take a basic inside out, top to bottom approach, it could go pretty quickly. So whether you do it yourself or you hire somebody to come in and help you out with it, some of the things you might want to have somebody help you out with, like climbing on roofs and inspecting chimneys and that kind of thing. But most of it is pretty common sense. And a lot of it really comes down to keeping water out of your house and keeping water where it's supposed to be. On the inside, we start on the inside, we can get up in the attic and check for small leaks that might not appear on your ceilings or walls. They might not have developed to the point where they're causing too much of a problem right now, but next year they could cause a much bigger problem. So if we can catch them now, they're much easier to fix and much less expensive to fix. So you want to pay close attention to chimneys, roof valleys near the eaves where you might get some ice dams. Flashing is always a sort of a weak spot on roofs. A lot of leaks develop in areas where there's flashing. Make sure your attic ventilation is adequate. Vents are clear because you don't want to get moisture building up in the attic, which can lead to a shortened roof lifespan and a lot of other problems. Animals might be trying to stay warm in the wintertime, so they might be trying to make their way in over the course of the cold winter. I personally can't believe it's springtime already. They've just kind of gotten used to winter, but it was fairly mild this year. So just get up in the attic, poke around a little bit with a flashlight if you have to, and just look for areas of water, especially animal intrusion, any other issues that may arise up there. Some animals might chew wires, so you might want to look for stuff like that. But mostly water is the main culprit. So from there, you can open up your windows, remove your interior storms, let some air in, and while you're doing that, make sure the windows are operating properly. If you notice signs of moisture buildup on the interior or some peeling paint, mildew, things like that, again, you can fix it now while it's a minor problem before it becomes a more serious problem. Make sure everything's just sort of getting some air and drying out as it should. And the fresh air will feel really good. Same thing with doors, basically, especially those doors that you don't use often. Get them opened up, check for that they're swinging properly, the tightness of the hinges, that they're not binding up anywhere. Check that all the hardware is functioning properly. Check the soundness of the wood. If you have wood doors, particularly at the bottoms of the doors where moisture tends to collect, Just make sure they're swinging properly and are sound, attacking small problems before they become bigger ones. Usually the problems with plaster, such as water stains and that kind of thing, they're usually pretty noticeable, but also check storage areas, closets that you might not go into all the time. Look around for water stains, look for cracks in plaster that could indicate some underlying problems. Fix the small cracks before they become a whole room of failed plaster. If they're very serious cracks, you might want to check for some underlying structural issues. But if they're just, if they're just hairline cracks, they just require some monitoring and to make sure they're not becoming bigger. Old plaster will crack naturally here and there over time, but as long as it's not progressing into whole walls of failed plaster or failed ceilings, then you're usually in pretty good shape. Once you get into the basement, if you have a flooded basement like we see on the left that was not flooded before, or even if you see, if you have a basement that's normally dry and all of a sudden you have some moisture problems, it's good to correct it right away. Same thing as above. Above in the attic, look for signs of pest intrusion, like rodents, insects, all that kind of thing. And sometimes if moisture is not immediately apparent, especially in the case of insects, they may be drawn by moisture in the basement. And if you get an infestation of powder post beetles, it can be very damaging to your house. So if you don't already have a comprehensive pest management plan, it's a good time to think about that. Get something holistic for the whole house. Manage mice, God forbid, rats, or any number of insects. Dry basements are good basements. On the outside is actually where we all like to get outside in the yard and do some landscaping in the springtime. Take a trip to the landscape nursery, plant some new plants, some flowers, some vegetables, all that kind of stuff. So as part of that activity, you could incorporate maintenance of the outside of your home along with that. So I just kind of make it part of the overall landscape plan of your property. Starting at the top of the house, and this is where you might want to have somebody come and take a look at things. And all these things are kind of they're all kind of tied together. So obviously, if you have a chimney problem, it could lead to a roof problem and vice versa. Chimney flashing is notorious for having leaks around the chimneys. If the chimneys are unused, sometimes they can absorb moisture, which can migrate down into the interior of the house. You don't want that. Chimney top dampers are a great idea so that water doesn't come in the top of the chimney, birds don't get in the chimney, raccoons, things like that. Chimneys are significant character defining features in a lot of cases. So we like to see them retained as part of the overall aesthetic of the property. But they require maintenance just like everything else. So as you're inspecting, you want to look for cracks in the mortar, if you notice a chimney leaning, or like the one on the left has got a lean, a bow in it, you want to have that corrected and seen to before it becomes a catastrophic failure, an expensive catastrophic failure. So check for cracks, check for spalling bricks that may have been subjected to freeze thaw cycles, freezing water that has absorbed into the masonry. And keep on top of things. The roof, moving on, obviously the roof and chimneys are part of the same system, really, to keep keeping the rain out of the interior of your house, keeping the snow out of the interior of your house. So after the harshness of winter, you might notice some failed shingles, some damage from ice dams, if you have a slate roof, some failed slates. So just keep an eye out for fatigue in roofing materials. Shingles have a lifespan of, depending on the shingles, 20 to 40 years or so, especially if your roof is approaching the end of its lifespan. It's going to deteriorate quickly once it gets to that point. So just keep an eye on it, check it. And it's a good idea to check it after a big storm, after a big windstorm. You might notice some shingles are pulling loose. The materials just get brittle and fragile with age. Fasteners can corrode. Slates can break loose if you have a slate roof. Look for algae growth on cedar roofs are susceptible to that if you have one of those. But it can also grow on asphalt roofs, which can indicate that it's approaching the end of its life, or that conditions are not optimal for your roof. Check for overhanging branches from trees that could be inhibiting airflow around your roof. Get those pruned back. Again, check on your attic ventilation. Another thing to keep in mind with attics is, one of the things we counsel against is spray foam in attics. And one of the big reasons for that is that it can hide those small leaks that we were talking about until they become much more problematic issues. So spray foam, although it is, the quickest, easiest way to achieve a high R factor in a roof, it does have some drawbacks. Eaves and gutters also, part of that greater system. If you have gutters on your house, there's no question they have to be cleaned a couple times a year. Fall and spring are those 2 times of year. So get all the leaves and debris out of your gutters. Make sure the seams are tight. Make sure the run of the gutter is draining water properly, so it's not just collecting in the middle. If there's a big belly in the gutter system, water won't run out properly. It'll just collect in there and eventually cause leaks. If you have integrated gutters, whether those are wooden gutters or a gutter system that's integrated into the roof line, like you find in some Italianate buildings, they're beautiful systems, but you may not notice right away if there's problems until the water leaks down through the eaves. So if you see staining on the eaves, notice water coming down through the eaves, it can be an indication of gutter problems above, or ice dams can cause a lot of that. So it's important to, as with the pests in the basement, a comprehensive plan for water management coming off the roof of the building. You want everything to be draining away from the structure, draining efficiently off the roof, onto the ground, and away from the building. So moving down the sides of the building, if you're fortunate enough to live in a beautiful house like the Wedding Cake House down in Kennebunk, you'll have your work cut out for you. But most people, it's a matter of you know, keep an eye on your siding, keep an eye on your cedar shakes. If you do have some decorative woodwork on your house, maybe not as elaborate as the Wedding Cake House, but there's certainly a lot of decorative elements that have been traditionally made of wood. Just look for small areas of failing paint, soft wood. Just probe gently with a little awl or a little penknife or something to make sure that, you know, the wood is sound underneath the paint. Sometimes the issues are not easily seen right away until it becomes more of a problem. Pay close attention to joints and where different materials abut each other, like where the siding butts into the corner boards is a place where you get a lot of rot. Check the caulking joints, make sure those are all well sealed so that water can't get in there. And despite the urge to pressure wash, because it can be a very quick way to brighten up your house, it can also be very damaging. So 3,500 PSI pressure washer against a wood house is far worse than a hurricane. So resist that temptation. Cleaning your house is good. Cleaning it with 3,500 PSI of water is not so good. And that goes for masonry, stone. A lot of different materials are just, they're not able to withstand those high pressures. So with the masonry, there can be susceptible to freeze-thaw cycles if your water is not being shed away from the building properly. So, you know, look for cracks in mortar, repair them with a suitable repair mortar. Look for spalling brick, spalling stone. That could be an indication of some uneven compression forces. It could be indication of water absorbing into the masonry and then freezing. It could be an indication of improper repair mortars being used in the past. Hopefully not a serious structural issue, but again, if you can sort of catch it as it's a small crack and not a huge fracture, then you're much better off. And watch out for harsh cleaners on your masonry. A lot of the masonry cleaners rely on acids and harsh detergents, which can be damaging to a variety of masonry products, even the natural stone in some cases, and even household bleach can be very, very damaging to historic masonry. So gentleness means necessary. Start with water, start with gentle water and a scrub brush, and start from there. Some of the acids in the cleaners can even dissolve traditional lime mortars. So it essentially kind of digests the building over time. And of course, we won't even talk about abrasive cleaners, sandblasting, and that kind of thing. It goes without saying. Windows, open up your storm windows, remove your storm windows. If you have the traditional wood storms, get everything a good cleaning. Put your storm windows away for the summer. Give your historic windows a little inspection. Look for glazing putty that might be pulling away from the glass. It's another opportunity for water intrusion if it is. Look for peeling paint, soft wood, the usual suspects, especially at the bottom of the window where the casing meets the jamb, meets the sill, that lower sash where everything sort of rests at the bottom. Our typical areas, you would see some of that. And just, address it as it's a small problem, as with everything else. If I look at the window on the left, the 90 years old window, and I see that as a fully restorable window, but it would be much better not to do that at that point and to take the 180-year-old window and just keep it as it is, keep it as it was intended to be. So little bits of maintenance go a long way. Foundation, exterior, perimeter of the building, foundations, same kind of thing. Keep things clean, keep things, leaves, excess soil, trap moisture against the foundation. You want to make sure you have good drainage at the ground, because even if your gutters are in good shape, if they're draining right there at the ground and the water is not managed properly, it will just flow back into the basement and be where you don't want it to be. So you don't want to have your house lifted in the air up on crib works unless you absolutely have to. So look for things like new cracks or spalling in concrete or brick foundations. If you have an older stone foundation, look for stones that may have shifted due to freeze-thaw cycles over the winter. Look for spalling. Look for vegetation that has grown up over the foundation or too close to the building to allow adequate airflow. When you're planting new plantings, like we talked about with the springtime landscaping, make sure you allow for a mature plant and not the immature plant that you probably bought at the landscape nursery. Some of them have many feet of spread and can encroach on a building, so make sure you allow at least a couple of feet. 3 feet is better, depending on the plant. You want to allow for root spread, canopy spread, all that stuff, so that it doesn't cause problems, and you'll get the best results for both your building and the plant. So after all that, you can get out and enjoy the summer, have fun, and you don't have to do any of this stuff until it's time to put your house to bed for the winter. And it's all just part of the cycle of life here in New England. And we get to play for a little while in July and August, hopefully. So, and with that, that's kind of the rundown of the basics of everything. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you could type it into the chat if you'd prefer not to speak. Okay, our first question's coming in from Sue. What would be considered a good comprehensive pest management plan? How do you keep mice from getting in through the stone foundation?
That's a good question, and it's probably a discussion you'd want to have with a pest control expert. Depending on mice are difficult. It's something we all deal with here in New England. Fortunately, we don't have much worse pests, but nobody likes mice in their house, and they can be very damaging. So I would recommend a good conversation with a pest control expert who probably knows a lot more about the behavior of mice and rodents than I do. And I mean, from a preservation perspective, the biggest thing to keep in mind is that they don't suggest something that's damaging to the house, because sometimes what is best for keeping mice out is not best for historic resources. So it's just kind of a balancing act of finding the best approach for your particular conditions and your particular house. And yeah, so I would start there, and then we would be happy to discuss whatever methods they come up with. We would be happy to discuss whether or not they're appropriate for your property.
Jonathan, I want to share that my wife quotes her grandmother as saying, it's not a sin to have a mouse. It's a sin to keep a mouse. You know, what we do in our house is we have a spot where they tend to seem to come in. So we just keep a trap there. I mean, we're fortunate it's in a closet, but, just take care of them when they come in, and then they tend to do it in the fall and other times, and then nothing happens for months.
Great. So our next question is from Judith. If you already have softwood in the frame and muntins on an antique window, what should you do about it at this point? Are there any ideas to how to keep woodpeckers from pecking on your siding? Two questions are related.
So there are, by softwood, I assume you mean that it's getting a little punky. It's like it's already starting to deteriorate a little bit. So yeah. The first thing to do really is to determine where that source of moisture is coming from, and address that if you can. And I would say, I mean, not being an expert about woodpeckers, but I would say they're pecking on your siding because they can sense that there's a food source in there. So it might be that you have some sort of insects in there, which again is probably related to the moisture issue. So that's the first thing to check, to see if you can remedy that. And then after that, there's a number of products that you can use. Some are traditional, some are not so traditional, to sort of consolidate soft wood before it gets to the stage where it's rotting. Mm-hmm. Some of them are epoxies. Some of them are, more traditional formulations. Some use, like shellacs and linseed oils and stuff like that, and more traditional resins to just sort of consolidate things. And depending on to what degree it has deteriorated so far, might determine what approach you would take on that. And if it's too far deteriorated, you might consider replacing individual boards where needed. But number one would be trying to figure out where that moisture is coming from, and stopping that from happening.
Okay. Great. Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a house, probably don't really have a vintage. The record doesn't have it, but I'm guessing it's about 120, 130 years old. Stone foundation, dirt floor. Uh-huh. Things are very solid, but I have water come through the walls and just leave through the floor. No problem. Is that a problem?
So it just sort of, it's wet certain times of the year, and then it dries out, and And then it's not a problem in the drier times of the year?
Yeah, it's really, you get a deluge, big heavy rainstorm, spring,
Right.
snow melt, but it never really pools. It just, there's spots where it comes through the stone foundation,
Right.
which is kind of loosely stacked. I mean, it's not like it's
Yeah,
heavily cemented.
right. I mean, it sounds like it's flowing through. So, I mean, if it's not consistently wet for months and months on end, it's probably not that big of a problem. And if it's not causing a problem, and I mean, you could probably spend thousands and thousands of dollars to fix it, so it didn't do that at all. But it's kind of it's kind of a gray area. I think some people would say any water in the basement is bad. But I personally, I think if it's flowing through, it's probably not that big of an issue. If you're not getting, mildew and wood rot on your joists, and you're not getting mold problems and that kind of thing, it's probably okay. Just keep an
So
eye.
my variant of that problem is that the only time I get leaks is essentially ice jams around the foundation. The water seeps in and then freezes.
Right.
And it's all gone now. I mean,
Right.
it was only, if you had to go down the right 10 days to see it at all.
Right.
Assuming that those frost heaves are eventually going to prove to be more powerful than my foundation, but
Yeah, it sounds like in your case, you could do some mitigations on the perimeter with the soil to make sure everything is draining properly, because you're right, over time that sounds like something that's gonna cause some problems with your foundation.
yeah, unfortunately, we already tried, and there's now heavy, there's nothing to trap the water, and it's heavy gravel, but we're just sand, and
Right.
the water's going to go where the water wants to go without a lot of pitching of some sort, I'm afraid.
Do you have gutters, or are you just managing the rainwater at the ground?
Just trying to manage it at the ground.
Yeah. I mean, you might try some gutters, I mean, which can be problematic in themselves, but as a way to divert the water a little further away from the building, is in the bad spots first and see if it helps.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should also add that we're going on 220 years with house is still winning, but it may not be forever.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes we because we get such a very limited view of conditions, really. I mean, over the course of 220 years, we get to see the problem for a few decades, and so to us, it's this major problem, but it's been, it's more or less stable for a couple of centuries, and we run around and try to do something about it where it's just kind of it's kind of in balance. Or I don't mean imbalance like out of balance, I mean in balance, like everything's kind of.
No, and my point was much more to, okay, what have I done if I put up gutters and I actually invite water to creep through the walls from above instead of
that's
below, right?
That's a valid concern. Sometimes you poke one area and you solve one problem and you just move the problem somewhere else. That's a real concern.
Thanks.
Okay,
This next question is very close to my heart. When are bats most likely to be trying to get into the house? We have an old house where bats grew to think of it as theirs. Some reconstruction and a new metal roof seems to have discouraged them, but is there a particular time that they want to reclaim their own old habits? I mean, for myself, I know every spring they show up and they screech and carry on, and then they go, and then randomly a couple times a year they're in the house and like we don't even know how they got in there, but that's an aside. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Ellie, you probably, if you have a like regular experience with bats, you probably know more about them than I do. I mean, I mean, just bats are going to be most active when the weather is warm and the bugs are out, and in the winter time, they're going to look for a place to sleep through the winter. And in both those cases, a house could be an attractive haven for them.
I have seen, and I don't know if they work, but I have seen recently that there's like this concept of putting little bat boxes, little houses on the side of your house, and that they'll go in there instead of your house, but I haven't tried this yet.
I've heard of that too. I'm not sure how well they work. I mean, it's a great concept, and you know, bats are pretty cool.
I know, I love bats, so I'm kind of like, what are you gonna do?
Right, they're cool when they're outside. They're not so cool when they're in your house.
So I'm embarrassed. That is my other question. And our bats are happy in the bat house that they have been occupying for many decades.
Oh, good.
They refuse to go anywhere near we followed every direction we ever could get from anybody on putting bat houses up on a new structure far away, relatively far away, 50 yards away from the place where they are accustomed to coming. They show absolutely no interest. Those perfectly constructed, perfectly placed bat houses.
I have heard that about bats. It's like once they roost in an area, it's like you know, I don't know if it's a scent thing or what it is, but you know, they just know it and they are used to it and they prefer it.
Painting what they left at the old location on the new surfaces at the new location did not help.
Oh wow!
Nice, you gave it a try. Oh my goodness.
That is well, I commend your dedication to the bats for trying that.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Feel free to just sing out. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
All right. It's pretty quiet out here, Jonathan. There's no other questions in the chat.
I'll
Ooh.
venture one.
Yeah, great.
Just unmuted myself. Did you address the paint on bricks problem?
Ooh.
We had a situation on a National Historic site that the people who bought it started repainting the bricks. They went from red to white, and rather than take it off. Then I have other people that say just leave it, and others that try to take it off with sanding or sandblasting or something. What would you recommend, or does it depend on the structure?
So, so the bricks had previously been painted red, and
Yes.
the new owners recently painted them white.
Yes.
And
there's some that are just painted red. And
okay.
they just painted old ones red because they didn't like the way they were probably disintegrating.
Right.
So they covered it up with red paint.
It can be very difficult and very labor intensive to remove that kind of stuff. I wouldn't recommend sandblasting. You could try some chemical paint strippers, particularly on the recent paint. They might work well. On the underlying paint, the older stuff, they might not work.
Might not work.
But on the newer stuff, I've had pretty good luck with the peel away products.
What is that?
They're made by a company called Dumond. And you essentially apply it over the brick, and then there's a papery film that goes over it, and as it strips the paint, when you leave it on there for a few hours, and then you peel the paper off, and the paint
Huh.
and all the crap sticks to the paper for the most part. It's very alkaline. It's a lye-based paint stripper. So the good thing about that is that itself is not toxic, but it does a great job of like dissolving human flesh. So you have to be careful working with it.
Okay, that's
But
that's good.
it's not. I mean, you just have to wear, gloves and eye protection and all that. And I found that when working with it, if you keep some plain old household vinegar around, if you do get a little on your skin, you can put some vinegar on it and it neutralizes it. And it's certainly better than the chemical strippers that rely on, toxic chemicals to work. So it's, like I said, it's not inherently toxic, and you do have to neutralize it because it's so alkaline. I mean, the upside of it being alkaline is that, the lime mortar is fairly alkaline in itself. So it's compatible in that way. But you do have to neutralize it at the end of the process. So when you buy it, it comes with a little, like a little packet of citric acid. So you have to like test the pH at the end of the process. And you want to get it as close to neutral as possible, which can take a little work, but it's a pretty good product. And it's not damaging to the brick or the mortar.
Okay. All right, we have another question. Helen asked, I got here late, so I don't know if you discussed this, and we haven't, but she's having trouble with glass falling out of her windows. The wood frames are so dry that she can't get glazing points hammered in. The putty type products don't last more than a few months. Do you have any suggestions?
If they're down to raw wood, you can treat them with a 50-50 blend of linseed oil and turpentine, and it helps to fortify the wood, soften it, and it's really important if you put the glazing compound on dry old raw wood, it won't stick because the wood draws all the moisture out of the glazing compound before it has a chance to cure, and it will just crack out and fall out like you're describing again. So it's really important to have, as you said, if the wood is so dry that it, nothing will stick to it, and the glass falls out, you have to really treat the window sash first as a separate issue. Get it fully prepared to accept the new putty, so it lasts as long as possible.
And how long do you leave the linseed oil and turpentine on before you can try to do something with it?
I would put it on, depending on how dry the wood is.
Very.
Put it on heavily and just let it soak in. And then, put more on. And if that soaks in too, then great, let it soak in. If you start to notice it's not soaking in anymore, just sort of go over it with a cloth or something to absorb some of the excess, and then, just let it dry. And then it's before putting on so I assume that these will be painted ultimately.
Maybe.
Okay. If they're like in the areas of the window where the glazing putty will be, once the linseed oil solution dries, put shellac on it.
Oh.
And I say shellac because if you say maybe painted, so usually the two choices are shellac or some primer, some white pigmented primer or something like that. But if you're not sure you're going to paint them, you just want to use like a clear shellac, and that creates a little barrier between the wood and the putty. And it allows the putty to still allows the putty to stick to stick to the wood where it's supposed to stick to it, but stops the wood from drawing the moisture out of the putty.
And is there a special kind of putty I should get?
Sarco is really good. You can find it online. There's probably some places around that carry it. It's SARCO. And there's some other, you know, less common ones that are nice to work with and they work well, but they can be fairly expensive. I mean, the one that's most common is the one you find at Home Depot is the DAP 33, I think. But this Sarco is quite a bit better than that. And they might even, I'd have to check to make sure, but I think they might even make one that's formulated especially for severely weathered wood. And avoid I don't like the acrylic glazing putties. I just don't find that some people like them, some people don't, but I don't find that they last as long or are as easy to work with as the traditional ones.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cool. Anybody else? Judith asks, I think you just solved my window problem as well. Could you let me know if you find the name of one formulated for severely weathered wood? So that might be something we take under advisement, unless you know offhand. Jonathan.
I don't know offhand. I have to look it up.
Okay. So Judith, we'll get back to you because I think we're going to see you in a little over a week. Yeah. Great. Anyone else?
So I was still typing.
Yes.
I seem to be shameless here today.
No, go for it. That's what we're here
Yeah.
for.
So I have plaster ceilings that anyone who looks up can see need attention, but ordinary people looking up can't tell which type of plaster it is, and therefore how big a problem it is, and therefore whether we should be thinking about just a top coat or whatever. There's some that look okay for that. Others need much more work. My question is, does anybody have any shortcuts to telling which kind of plaster I have so I know how skilled the person I invite to help me work with it needs to be before I let them proceed?
That's a great question. And that's something else that I would feel more comfortable if I looked into that a little bit. And you said your house is 220 years old?
Actually, I exaggerated a little bit, but it's 210 at least.
And as far as you know, are they original? I mean,
No. Who knows how many?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was hesitating asking that question.
Yeah,
Especially,
it's clear that some of them are quite new.
yeah.
Others, and you can tell that they're not all the same material. Some seem very closely sealed with huge cracks. Others aren't sealed very well at all. And what happens is little dusts come off. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable just if you send me an email to remind me, and we can have a little bit further conversation about that.
Yeah. Is your contact information?
It's just jonathan@mainpreservation.org.
Okay. Will you talk to me if I'm in New Hampshire?
Sure. Or I noticed Beverly Thomas is in the audience. So I might CC her on the conversation too.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here. I'd be happy to talk to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, well, a lot of these sessions, don't I?
We don't discriminate.
No, I'm sure Beverly gets some crossover from people in Maine on the border.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We share all our great resources
yeah,
and contractors.
yes.
True.
The few that we have.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all right, if we're in that mode, then just send me a name. I don't.
Well, actually, we do have a new plaster contractor in New Hampshire.
Don't you dare say that name out loud in front of more than one other person.
But he's old school, and I'm sure he could help you. So
Yeah,
send me an email, and I'll send you his name.
we
Okay.
just heard about another guy in Kittery. I wonder if it's the same guy.
Might be the same one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So he's going to be in high
Third
demand.
generation plaster contractor.
It sounds like the same guy.
Yeah.
So he's going to be in high demand.
Oh, he already is.
Yeah.
Definitely is.
Excellent. Any other questions? Oh, here comes one. So Sue asked Jonathan, any recommendations on how to maintain, protect unused chimneys? One of mine, presumably, has all old bricks, even above the roof line. The other chimney has been modified. Fireplaces removed, new bricks from the roof line up. The modified chimney is failing. It's missing mortar and bricks at this point.
Oh, well, what is that? What does that tell you about the old workmanship, right?
True.
Without getting on site and taking a look at it, it's hard to say exactly what the culprit is there. It could be a lot of things. The first thing that comes to mind is just there may be some freeze thaw stuff going on there. It may be an incompatible mortar with the brick. So it could be a number of things. Again, if you send me an email about that, I'd be happy to have a little more in-depth conversation.
Yeah, so if you want to send Jonathan an email, jonathan@mainepreservation.org. And we'll be sending around a recording of this session and some resource materials as well. And we'll include Jonathan's name on that. You're welcome. Anyone else? It's a good conversation. They keep popping up. All right. Looks like we may have worn them out.
All right.
Good job.
So I have one more self-serving question.
Okay.
That is a little off the wall for this presentation, but I have some taken out of my house framing elements that I have no better thing to be doing than letting them rot in my backyard. I would not recommend using them as structural elements. I am frequently quite irritated by the way such things are used as decoration. But if anybody has a legitimate place for such things, I have quite a few and would be happy to help them become part of something more useful for somebody else's old future.
That's great. That's good to know. And
we are located in central New Hampshire.
Okay. That might be something that Beverly might be a little more, might be a little bit more in her territory.
I haven't made this offer before because I have not been sure that we didn't have much use. We're coming closer and closer to being sure we don't have much use for some of it.
Right.
So.
Charlotte, if you want to send me an email, feel free to do that.
Okay, I will.
Do you know my email?
I'm sure that I have it.
It's New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, so just you can find me, or bt@nhpreservation.org.
Okay,
I'd happy to try to find a home, a good home.
okay.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah.
The good home.
So Jonathan, can you progress the slides to up a bit? So yeah, I just wanted to mention to everyone that we have an important webinar coming up at the end of this month that's geared towards building owners, businesses, governmental entities, anyone that's interested in historic tax credits and how to go through the certification process to get those tax credits. This is the second in our series that we began last year with a one-on-one that was an overview of the tax credit, how it works, how you qualify, and how you go about, getting started on a project. This one digs in to the specifics with 3 preservation consultants that are active here in Maine, Christine Beard, Chris Kloss, and Sky Hansen. It's going to be a very interesting and informative session. This might not be of great interest to some of our homeowners unless you have a business, because to get this credit, you need to be a business that needs some credits or can syndicate some credits, and you can learn all about that at the session if it so suits you. It's $15. But if you have financial hardship, you can reach out to us and we can talk about a scholarship. So that's what's coming up at the end of this month. And other than that, if you progress one more slide, I think it might be on the next slide, Jonathan. Yes, just one quick thank you again to our sponsors. You can see them here. Without their assistance, this webinar series wouldn't be possible. Their support has been extremely important to us always, but especially in this past year, as we've kind of pivoted to an online relationship with you, the public, because we can't see you in person so much. But hopefully COVID is now ending and we'll be back in the field with everyone, hopefully soon without a mask. If we want to pop up to the next slide, Jonathan. Sorry to make you drive.
All right. It didn't move. There we go.
Okay. And so finally, thank you. And thank you, Jonathan, for that great presentation. If you liked what you heard today, we certainly would welcome your financial support as well. The money that you provide helps fund the programming and support the mission. So we'd welcome your support, and the address is right here. You can always find it right on our home site. And if you have any questions after the session, like I said, we'll be sending around a recording link to the session, as well as a printed information resources page with Jonathan's address. And you can respond to us if you have any other further questions, and Jonathan will try and get you some answers. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.